Hi, Chris Nelson here, and I am here today. It is April 6th, 2023. I want to introduce to you Michael Caputo. Michael Caputo, President Trump's Assistant Secretary of HHS during COVID, served on dozens of high-profile global political campaigns from Ronald Reagan in 1984. Russia's Boris Yeltsin. If any of you are old enough to remember Boris Yeltsin, I am, in 1996. And to Donald Trump in 2016. A veteran of the U.S. Army infantry and an executive at major corporations, his 7 years living and working in Moscow in the 90s made him a target of Hillary Clinton and her Russia hoax. Today, he is Chief Communications Officer of Miami-based Americano Media, the nation's first conservative Spanish language network. And Mr. Caputo, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, we've been seeing what's been going on with President Trump. Could you just explain in the background how you got caught up in the Russia collusion thing?
Well, I've known President Trump since, I guess, Roger Stone introduced me to him in 1988. And I wove myself in and out of the kind of Trump tapestry here and there on projects and going to boxing matches, things like that, over the years. I got back in touch with him rather intensely in 2013 when we were trying to recruit Donald Trump to run for governor of New York. That went through 2014. He decided against it. He said he was going to instead run for the big thing, as he liked to call it back in those days. And then some months later, he decided he wanted to buy the Buffalo Bills. And so I was coordinating that attempted purchase, at least on the PR side of things, in 2014. I got pulled into the election when he was looking for a New York State primary, director, a campaign director for New York State. It was an easy yes for me because I like him very much. I've known him for many years. It was also an easy yes because New York wasn't supposed to matter at all. The last time I think New York mattered during a presidential primary, one of the candidates was probably named Roosevelt. It didn't, we're so late in the game, but it ended up mattering in 2016 because Ted Cruz hung on a long time, if you remember.
Yes, he did. I voted for him in the primary. Yeah. I didn't vote for Trump in the primary, but was happy about him winning the general. But I remember that because once it got to Florida, it was just Trump or Ted Cruz.
Right. And I had left the campaign in the summer over an internal kind of staffing spat. And but I was always supportive. I went to the convention in support of the president. I worked as a surrogate in some loose fashion during the cycle. And when he won, we all celebrated. I went to Washington for the inauguration. I partied with all my friends like, Paul Manafort and Roger Stone. And actually, if you look back at everybody I was, partying with during the inauguration, we all ended up in some way, shape, or form sucked into Russiagate. It really turned out to be, as we know in hindsight, a fire that was started by Hillary Clinton, and she's still waving, fanning those flames today. But it was a false investigation. I went in front of the House Intelligence Committee interrogation, the Senate Intelligence Committee, and Mueller. It was a disturbing investigation during the Crossfire Hurricane thing. We didn't even know that was going on when we were actually in campaign mode in 2016. So from our perspective, it was illegal from the very beginning, but they really were just sharpening their teeth on the Trump team. What they're doing now with this bogus arrest and indictment and arrest really started with Hillary Clinton probably sitting in a small campaign conference room looking at her people and saying, yes, let's create a hoax that will catch Donald Trump up as some kind of Putin lackey. It all started that one day.
Now, it says here on your Wikipedia profile, which this is what the left say, that you were working over in Russia it literally says to help bolster Putin's image. Were you helping to bolster Putin's image in Russia at any time?
No, I actually left. I was sent to Russia in 1994 by the Clinton administration to meddle in Russia's elections. I mean,
Wait, what? You were
I'll
sent
repeat that.
over there by, okay, no, go on.
I was sent by Bill Clinton through the State Department, USAID, to head up the Eastern European Moscow-based office of the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, which is backed by USAID money. And my job was to write the Russian election law and bring in lobbyists to lobby it to passage in order to have a free and fair election, a transparent election. The law we passed didn't really resemble the one that we, the law that was passed did not resemble the law that we introduced. But really, I was there to help train Russian Democrats, read that, as you will, to run campaigns. I started a thing for the Yeltsin team called Rock the Vote. It's the same thing as what we started here in the United States to get young people to vote. Rock the Vote Russia was a project I took on as part of my job as a head of International Foundation for Electoral Systems. I was there working for Yeltsin. Putin came up the ranks when I was there. I met Putin when he was deputy mayor of St. Petersburg. He wasn't a very talkative sort. We co-chaired an electoral conference in St. Petersburg in 1995. And then, I interacted with him here and there as he was climbing the ranks of the Yeltsin administration. But I found out on the beach, Palm Beach, at midnight on New Year's Eve, Russia time, that Yeltsin was stepping down and Putin was stepping up. And I went back to Moscow, packed my bags, and left. Putin and I didn't work together, and Wikipedia is a bucket of trash.
Yeah, and I just the kind of stuff that's on there, and I think that Wikipedia has now destroyed their credibility because over time people are realizing that there's some lies up there. So, what do you make then of all this? The accusation was that you met with some Russian agent or somebody from Russia, and then you said that, and then later on said that you didn't know this was a Russian agent, and somehow this helped to tilt the favor in the side of Hillary Clinton. You want to talk on that?
Are you talking about the Greenberg accusation? It's
Yes.
kind of an obscure part of the Russiagate lore, but it's factual. I lived 7 years at the behest of the Clinton administration for much of it in Russia. A lot of the people I know in my life are Russians. I married a Russian for a time. I have a Russian daughter. I'm married now to a Ukrainian because I spent a lot of time in Ukraine as well.
Well, that will make you more popular now.
Right, it doesn't. Yeah, I've lost my shot at popularity a little while ago. But the fact of the matter is, I never worked for Putin. Where these people get confused is the idea that I worked for a time when the American government under Bush, number 43, was trying to cozy up to Putin. If you remember, they looked each other deep into their eyes and they can work together, that whole phase. And on behalf of that policy prescription, I worked in favor of a short project that benefited a media organization that was friendly to Putin. That was me working for Putin, apparently. And in the end, while 20, 30 years later, after spending 7 years in the peak of my life in Moscow, having children and great friends who were Russian as well as Ukrainian, I was approached by a Russian here in Miami who via telephone talked to a Russian friend of mine, my business partner, in fact, who ran a PR firm and rock and roll production company with me in Miami. And he said, this guy wants to talk to you, hand me the phone. And there's this guy on the other end with a thick accent saying, yes, I'd like to talk to you, maybe give you some information for the Trump campaign. I was in Trump Tower at the time. And I said, well, I'm not going to be going down to Miami and I'm not going to be talking to you about this over the phone. I'll see if I can find somebody to talk to you. And I ended the conversation, right? And if you realize at that time in a race against the Clintons, we were getting phone calls like this 2 and 3 and 4 times a day from all over the weirdness of electoral politics. We had a closet reserved just for notes from kooks at the Trump campaign. It was stacked all the way to the ceiling with people who sent, clay busts of Donald Trump that they had done in the middle of the night when they woke up from a dream. I mean, it was a crazy situation. We're getting all this incoming information, and I just kind of shuffled it off to Roger Stone, one of my best friends for the longest time, because he lived in Miami. And I called up Roger. I said, Roger, there's this guy, Henry Greenberg, wants to talk to you. And he's like, Roger, literally, since we're not on network television, I'll tell you what he said. He goes, go fuck yourself, Caputo. And I said, what do you mean? He says, I'm not going to talk to some crazy fucking Russian. I'm really busy. If you remember, he wasn't with the Trump campaign at the time. And he said, all right, for a favor, I'll talk to this guy. So I think a day went by, 2 went by, and Roger went and met with this guy who called himself Henry Greenberg. And he showed up in a MAGA t-shirt and a MAGA hat, right? Red as the day is long, and a thick accent. And I really love Donald Trump, and if you look at greenbergfiles.com, where we put all this evidence up, he was a cartoon character. Roger met with him for about a minute and a half and left, and he texted me and he says, don't ever send me to meet these assholes again. He's asking for $2 million. And we both laughed. That was the end of it. Well, that was literally it, right? But come to find out, I totally forgot about this because remember, many of my friends are Russian. I was sent there by the Democrats. And so when I was asked, did anybody interact with you about the election? When the House first asked me that, I didn't remember this nutty conversation that lasted a minute and a half, right? But when I went before Mueller, I was going through before the Senate on a Tuesday and Mueller on a Wednesday. I flew to Washington for it with my attorney. My attorney was the Attorney General of New York. I hired the best one I could find. And a U.S. attorney in the Western District of Buffalo, where I was from, Dennis Vacco, and he did a preparation session. I guess it was proprietary stuff. These lawyers all have ways of interacting with their clients, where he's running through stuff, potential questions, peppering me with questions at like lightning speed, and like had me go through this practice session. And he said, did you ever speak to any Russian about the elections? I said, never. And he said, ever? I said, never. And he said, Michael, you've been hanging around with Russians since you were sent there by the Clintons in 1994. Nobody ever asked you about Donald Trump's campaign? And I said, crazy people here and there. He said, like who? And I said, I don't know. I remember I got a phone call once and I told him the story, and Dennis shut his book. And he said, that's a Fed, Michael. That's a Fed. I was a U.S. attorney in the Western District. I was Attorney General of New York State. That's a Fed. The guy that came to you is a Fed. He said, when they ask you about this, by the way, you were already asked about this in the House and you forgot about it, so you have to alter your testimony. But if you're asked about it tomorrow by the Senate or by the Mueller, you got to tell him the story of Henry Greenberg. I said, the guy's a nutcase. He said, tell the story. If he's a nutcase, he's a nutcase. But if he's not, he's a Fed, right? So long way around the barn, I sit down in front of the Mueller team. It was Zelensky, the same guy who drilled Roger, right? And Zelensky had a stack of papers on this side.
Wait a minute, his name is Zelensky?
Zelensky, yeah. Not lost on me, okay? Zelensky, who is assistant attorney out of DOJ, who you would imagine. He's like a legacy graduate of the Ivy League. His dad was in the DOJ. His hair is perfect. It's one of these guys, right?
Oh,
but
so
he really had
blonde highlights and a Hawaiian shirt.
Not at all. I would never imagine him wearing it unless I had Photoshop, right? And an absolute, complete tool, right? And he really wanted Roger. He's sitting in front of me with 2 stacks of paper, and he works his way through one stack, gets all the way to the bottom when we take a break. And my attorney says, this is where they're going to this is the hammer. So I go back in and by the way, while he's telling me this is the hammer, we're in the break room where the refrigerator and stuff is, where everybody's lunches are, And in comes Andrew Weissman to get his lunch from the refrigerator. I look over my shoulder and there's Weissman trying to pick his lunch up. This is a figure I'll never forget. But that guy's a nut job, Andrew Weissman. He's now on MSNBC. I mean, he's the guy that they should call in front of the weaponization committee every single day. But anyway, I go back in and they ask me, Michael, have you ever been approached by a Russian regarding the 2016 election and offered anything for Hillary Clinton? The same exact question, word for word, that they had asked me in the House, and I had answered incorrectly. And I said, in fact, I have. And I told him the whole Henry Greenberg story, and Zelensky's face just fell like a cake. Like his whole face fell. We were told, I went through chapter and verse what it was, and we were told that we were going to be there until after 6. I told him all about Henry Greenberg. Turns out his name is not Henry Greenberg. And we were there another 20 minutes. That was 3:30 when we left. He didn't go through this other stack of paper. He went through 2 or 3 deep. And after I told him exactly what the exchange about Henry Greenberg, his whole interview with me fell apart. They let us go because it was my attorney's belief that they had a whole stack of paper that they're going to drill me on if I had lied to an FBI agent by saying I didn't know anything about any meeting.
Wow.
I pulled the thread out of it. I left that and I called Roger. I said, Jesus, dude, you remember that crazy guy that we talked to? He said, what crazy guy? And I told him, he said, you don't know that guy was a Russian, because I didn't know for sure he was a Russian. I guessed it, but because I said when we went back and forth, I said, sounds like a crazy Russian when he asked for $2 million. But Roger's like, oh, no, it couldn't have been. I said, yeah. So I went, my attorney told me, he said, what you're talking about here is a federal, they were trying to trap you. This guy's a Fed. It's an absolute truth. And all you got to do is find it. And so I had raised money for my legal fees, and I used some of that. And I hired a private investigator in America and in Russia. And I dug up records indicating that this guy had been a federal informant for the FBI for more than a decade. I think it was almost 17 years.
You found the guy.
We absolutely found him in court testimony where he testified regarding his relationship with the FBI. Sworn statements, pay stubs. We got it all because it was all, it had fallen out from under seal in a California case involving this character. So it's all at greenbergfiles.com. He's a really shady, violent criminal character. He's still in Florida. By the way, he probably lives by you now.
Yeah. So
you're more interesting than me now, man. He's living.
I'm glad that's why some of this is interesting to me because and I hope a lot of people are listening to this because these are the same kind of tactics that are going to be used, and you might not think you're worth going after, but gee whiz, look who they do go after lately. And so he wasn't able to get you on that, but you did. You and Roger were both pardoned by President Trump, correct?
I actually was never. It's our theory that I was always a witness. You go from being a witness to a subject to a target, right? If you come in as a witness, and it's always the FBI's dream to make you a subject, so they can then leverage your statements to make you a target. And if you're a subject, you can be used to testify against guys like Roger, who can then move it up the ladder to Trump, right? They never were able to move me out of being a witness because of this Greenberg gambit falling apart on them. So I was never charged with anything, but it doesn't matter. I mean, they ruin your life anyway. I mean, my entire family was destroyed by this. And we're one of probably 25 or 30 families. Think of the Papadopoulos family, the J.D. Gordon's family, Carter Page, God bless him. Carter Page. I mean, there are people who, Paul Manafort, by the way, who I've seen since the president pardoned him, he is completely zen. He absolutely, you talk to Roger Stone, and you know Roger's real mad about all this. He should be, right? But you talk to Paul Manafort, and he's so centered. He's so happy to be out of jail and with his family. He's like he could teach a yoga class. The guy's so leveled. You know, I don't understand that. I'm still, trying to deal with my anger over it,
Yeah, and you had some health problems there. You had cancer and you beat it. And you want to talk about that for just a minute?
Yeah. Well, cancer is driven by stress, and there was probably nothing more stressful than the COVID response. I was at home watching the president's press conferences, and then watching Andrew Cuomo's press conference after, and then watching the Buffalo area leadership press conference after that every day, like everybody was, right? We all did that, right? And
I was watching those press conferences every day. It was every time in the afternoon. I would flip that on and listen to Trump.
I had gone through the Russiagate stuff, and when they determined that there was no Russian meddling at all, I moved on with my life. I did a film about Ukraine, which appeared on OAN, and it's on Rumble now for free. You can watch it, called The Ukraine Hoax. And then I wrote a book about my experience in Ukraine, what I thought was happening with the president's impeachment #1 on the perfect phone call. I wrote a book about that, and I was about ready to go on a book tour to go out and sell the book, and everything got canceled, if you remember, right after CPAC in 2020, and everything just fell apart. So I'm at home stuck. My book is languishing on Amazon, and everything's falling apart for everyone. And after the third press conference every day, my wife and I would sit in our kitchen table in Buffalo and talk about what we're going to do, who's going to go to the grocery, what do you think they have there? All the questions we all asked ourselves. And I'm at the table one day, and my phone rings, and it's the president's number. I hadn't talked to him on the cell phone since Russiagate began. I went to see him at Mar-a-Lago. I went to see him at the White House when everything was over with Russiagate. But we hadn't talked on the phone for a while. But he called me out of the blue, and you don't have to put him on speaker. You can hear him just from the microphone that goes in your ear. And my wife is listening. I held the phone up like this to my wife. I'm like, and I said, "Mr. President," he said, "Michael, how are you? How you doing? After the Russiagate, blah blah blah." And he said, "I'd like to ask you to help with the COVID response. It's a mess, and especially the communications. Could you come in?" And I look over at my wife, and she's doing this, like,
oh, wow,
right? And look, I'm an Army infantry guy. You don't just raise your hand for military service and then someday you're not serving anymore. The president of the United States calls you when the country is in meltdown mode. You go. I don't care if it's Barack Obama, George Washington, Donald Trump, you go. And I went as assistant secretary. It was the worst job I ever had. I arrived on, I think, April 14th. So much had already gone wrong. And, it was I can talk about that for hours. I can tell you the one thing I learned after going through Russiagate and dealing with the deep state, and then going through COVID and dealing with HHS and the people involved in all of that. Deep science makes the deep state look like deep kindergarten. It's a really frightening place where there's so much power and money that you cannot believe it. But after dealing with that, and it was a really oppositional term of service, I ended up with head and neck cancer. It happened in mid-September. I didn't make it through the election.
Could Fauci have infected you by any chance?
Oh God, no. In fact, listen.
Did
I mean, you're not the only guy to say that to me, okay? And not even just Fauci. Like, there are guys who I know and were from
it seems a little bit interesting. You came down with cancer after hanging around.
I got to tell you, there are two things I want you to know. I have a different opinion of Tony Fauci than most people do. I'm disappointed in the things I hear about gain of function research. I don't like the way some of the communications have gone on in my absence. But I was sitting in a COVID task force meeting, or after a COVID task force meeting, and an aside meeting, and I was sitting next to Robert Redfield, the head of the CDC, a great guy, a devout Catholic, by the way, a wonderful person. We disagreed on a lot of things, but a great guy. And my phone rang, and I turned my head like this, and I was 300 pounds, by the way. I'm 200 now.
I know. I'm looking at these old pictures of you, just going, "Wow."
You don't have to be fat. I don't recommend the diet at all. You don't have to be fat, right? But I turned my head like this, and Redfield reached out and he said, "What's that?" And he poked me in the neck, and I said, "What's what?" He said, "You didn't feel that?" He said, your lymph node is hard as a rock. You got to go to the hospital right now, Michael. There's something wrong. So they put me in a black limo and took me at speed with lights to the NIH, where I was awaited by the Surgeon in Chief of the United States, by the way, and the head of the National Cancer Institute at the door. And they took me in, and 5 hours later, my lymph node was gone. They had put me under surgery and taken my lymph node out. By the way, not many people do that. My understanding is, I'm not a medical person, even though I'm a communications person in the medical side of HHS. I could never tell you what's wrong with someone. But my understanding is not many people cut open or try to cut out the lymph node when they're trying to diagnose cancer, because you can poke it and the cancer can spread. You're already, if your cancer is somehow in the lymph node, it's already spreading. They identified that I had cancer, almost immediately, within hours. And that they said, because it was in my lymph node, that it was likely already in my brain. It was a surreal experience, being diagnosed that way by the head of the CDC, having the Surgeon in Chief, not the Surgeon General, the Surgeon in Chief of the United States, undoubtedly one of the best surgeons on the planet. But
you got Fauci in charge of the
Let me tell you something. When I was stuck, I want to complete what I was saying. First of all, Redfield, a hero. Redfield, a hero. The Surgeon in Chief, a hero. The National Cancer Institute director. All these people are not the least bit political. Not the least bit political. Fauci, let me tell you something. I was in charge of Tony's media coverage in some way. Tony did whatever he wanted mostly. But I was in charge of the media coverage of all the executives, personally. And we were trying to work out, if you remember, there's a real issue about when Tony goes on, when he doesn't. The White House didn't want him on. It was, he would go on even though he hadn't been approved. There was and that was all on me, right? It was a very tense situation. But Tony heard that I went back to Buffalo to Roswell Park Cancer Institute, and that this was happening to me, and he called me out of the blue. Dr. Fauci, hi, how you doing? And I told him what was happening. I told him that I was really torn between radiation and chemo or radiation and surgery, two different, treatment plans, very different. And I'll tell you, I was stuck. I didn't know what to do. They were telling me that it was probably in my brain, that I was probably going to die. I was really, really, as you can imagine, if you remember when I went down kind of injudiciously. I did a Facebook rant after I found out I had cancer, and I was
they said you had a meltdown. Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah. It was. Let me tell you, I just found out I was dying. I was dying from cancer, so yeah, I'll admit I was a little stressed.
I've had a few of them. Don't worry about it. It happens.
And I said things an assistant secretary should never say, obviously. Yeah. But at the same time, I was dying, and I was trying to come to terms with it, and I had just heard. So it is what it is. It's a date that will live in infamy for our family, right? But it is, and Fauci called me and he said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I can't choose. One's going to kill me, one's going to save me. I don't really know what to do. And I don't know who's good at what, which team." I was at a good hospital. The alternative treatment was from a guy who left that hospital to start his own practice. And Fauci's like, "Okay, Michael, listen, I'm going to call you back." He called me back about a half an hour later. And he said, "Listen, I've assembled a team of 4 doctors from the National Cancer Institute and myself, and we're going to interview both treatment teams, and we're going to help you decide which one to choose. Two very different treatments, right? Surgery, non-surgery, right? At the base of your tongue, it can mean the difference between talking and never again. And I was a radio talk show host for a living, right? So he called me back. They actually interviewed everyone. I checked. Tony himself did some of it. He called my general practitioner's office, and he's like, I found out this later from the receptionist. The receptionist is like, "Hello, Dr. Weingarten's office." And he says, "Hi, Tony Fauci for Dr. Weingarten," right? And she goes, "Yeah, right," click. Right. And then he called back, and the same thing. He's like, wait. And but he did all this. And listen, I know people, there's a lot of hate going around. There's a lot of reason for hate. There's a lot of reason for questions. I was right in the middle of all that. And I'm telling you, the more questions are better than less. But Tony Fauci, he participated in the medical care that saved my life. And I'm not going to dine out on someone like that.
If he has a conscience and is a decent man, I mean, he said the truth. I've seen him say the truth, that masks don't do anything to prevent virus spread. Why would he turn around then and want to do these horrible things to the country by to shut people down and to try to force masks on kindergartners and tell them they have to wear a mask unless they take the vaccine? And I mean, he was caught being dishonest, going back and forth so many times, and it just it's interesting though to hear another side of the story. Is this political pressure he was under, or
well, I'll tell you,
limelight, or is it politics? What do you think?
We talked at great length, he and I, because he was really caught up in White House, fighting, and we actually got along because I tried to, like, White House wanted him off TV. He wanted to go on and do more TV. I tried to figure out the best idea. My idea, by the way, was not to decrease Tony Fauci's appearances on television, but to flood the zone with all of the expertise that the White House brought in there. I mean, Redfield was solid expertise, apolitical. Seema Verma, apolitical. Alex Azar, These guys could have been out there in the media making important pronouncements, but the White House had let the media choose Tony Fauci as their favorite voice. You flood the zone. You don't stop Tony. You dilute it with a bigger message from a wider team. But the White House wouldn't do that. It's a long story. Alyssa Farah wouldn't do it. I believe Alyssa had other ideas in mind. But I can tell you that, I've had breakfast at Tony Fauci's house. I understand, I think, a bit about these lifetime public health officials. And I want to lift it away from Tony into the broader scheme of things. In that public health for many years, I'm not saying this about Tony in particular, but public health in the 1960s, when I was young and getting vaccines as a boy, it was about lying if you needed to get the public to do what they needed to do to protect each other from pestilence and plague. Public health has always been about the little white lie that gets you to the finish line that you need. And I think that continued all the way until the present. And guys like Fauci, who served there 50 years and are still in the original mode, now, for them to lie to you in a public speech that only Walter Cronkite covered, because only Walter Cronkite had viewers, right? It was a one-way feed. Now people are getting these messages on their cell phone, and they've got an Encyclopedia Britannica at their fingertips, and they can find out within seconds that you're lying, right? And I think public health has never adjusted to the fact that not even a little white lie, a public health fib, is acceptable anymore. You can't communicate in this fashion. And the public health systems of the United States, down to the state level, but not in every state, for example, Florida, they still tell lies to get people to do what they need to do. This has to change. I was trying to change that as assistant secretary. Biden embraced it. And I think, Tony Fauci, as well as others, are communicating according to the old school.
Well, when you talk about what we need to do, Surgeon General Florida Joe Ladapo talks in his book that it was pretty well known that without a China-style lockdown, which would have been impossible to do in the United States, as we have a constitution, would have been the only way to really prevent spread to the level that they wanted to, and that they knew this, but they went along with this lockdown that they knew that once they eased the lockdown, that the cases would go back up. And then also when it was shown that hydroxychloroquine worked, and even President Trump was talking about this, he steps in. So, a lie to make us do the right thing that would end in the situation improving.
Well, if your policy is correct and
this didn't improve the situation.
It didn't. And I think that
perpetual misery. Do you think Trump should have fired Fauci right after he started getting insubordinate about reopening on Easter?
Well, I got to tell you, I want to address that. You opened a wide continuum of doors there.
Yeah, I'm so happy to.
That's good. I'm glad you did. I think, first of all, Dr. Ladapo, I really enjoy him. I got a chance to spend several hours with him. My network, Americano Media, it's the first conservative Spanish language multimedia network. We interviewed Dr. Ladapo, I think just shortly after DeSantis's big wins last year. And I think he's incredible. I remember Dr. Ladapo because I was HHS secretary when they were on the steps of the Supreme Court having their first press conference as the doctors who were trying to talk some sense into the federal response. And I remember that day because I had, as Assistant Secretary for Health for Public Affairs, I had 400 plus employees. I think around 450. And of course, that's the communications people at CDC, the communications people at NIH. They all report up their as communicators up through the assistant secretary. And most of them I never saw because it was COVID and nobody went to work. The only people that went to work were the political appointees. But the day that Ladapo,
nice for that, they still got to work.
The day that Ladapo and the other doctors were on the Supreme Court steps, I found out later that members of my staff were actually producing dossiers on the public profiles of each of the doctors who walked up and introduced themselves on microphone. I had not authorized this. It really wasn't HHS's business. But, it was a degree of independent operations going on in the federal bureaucracy that's beyond explanation. We could go on for hours about this, but they're weaponized completely. They're weaponized against Ladapo. And he went on to do great things, including be selected, a terrific selection, as Surgeon General of Florida. The book, what's that? Something about suspending fear? Yes, transcending fear. It's a great book. He gave me one. I gave it to my stepmother for a gift. He's a tremendous asset to Florida. People should be thankful he's there. I think a lot of states are doing things correctly now. I think a lot of states were trying to do their best under absolutely lack of information, and the federal government was falling down over and over again. But at the end of the day, I'll tell you, there was a discussion of why Fauci was about, right? Why he was in this. Whether it was at the staff level luncheons at HHS and the secretary's dining room, or the White House mess, or, in the back of the room, the backbenchers during the COVID task force, the discussion was always there. It was always like this far from the surface. And I think that even though Dr. Redfield now is being more frank in his opinions about
it would have been nice if he did that back then, but
I'm happy
to see that he is saying the things he's saying now.
He was. I'm here to tell you.
But
He was.
I mean,
He was.
he was backing up. I remember him sitting there. He went from, do you have to wear a mask to prevent the spread of COVID? No. Or if you're not sick, no. To, this mask is going to save our lives.
Redfield said that.
He testified that masks that this was going to be the thing that was going to stop this.
Right. I mean, I got to tell you,
why were they lying about that?
The messaging went from here to here. It was the craziest situation I've ever been involved in. But I can tell you that behind closed doors and in the COVID task force, nobody but Dr. Redfield was talking about the origin of the virus, and he was bringing it up at the most inopportune times. Redfield was the only member of the professional medical community at the political appointment level that was trying to get this looked into. While he was bringing it up, there was people snickering about it behind his back. I mean, it's, I understand that a lot of the communications during the COVID response were willy-nilly, but the information was coming at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and there was no great way to manage it.
A lot of people think that there was a bigger agenda behind this, that mass vaccination, and I know that Redfield he's come out now and really just blown the lid on gain of function, that this was going on, and that this is, I think he even said, this is probably where COVID came from. But beyond the origins of it, it really, the fact that this went on so long, it really seemed like there was an agenda going on here to make people as uncomfortable as possible until they got this vaccine. What was the deal with that? And
are you familiar with Paul Alexander, who is my scientific advisor? Okay. He's an epidemiologist and a methodologist. He's highly critical of all of this, and was as my advisor. In fact, he lit himself on fire as my advisor to try to stop them from canceling school in September 2020.
Wait! He actually lit himself on fire?
Oh no, I'm just saying figuratively. What happened was Paul discovered some inside reports that were being pushed around, that he saw trying to push people's opinion toward keeping schools closed for the fall of 2020, and as a federal recommendation for school closure. And he saw the back and forth of reports, what they call the MMWRs, that were moving in this direction. He as a methodologist, a PhD methodology, had found the methods of the reporting were flawed. And he's like, look, they're clearly trying to close the schools in 2020 again. You can't let them do this, right? And I said, okay, Paul, we're going to do something. I took it to the White House that day. I took it to several different people, senior Trump officials, and said, this is going down. And I actually took Paul with me on a second series of meetings. And what happened, I said, Paul, don't write a bunch of emails to people saying that this is happening. He's getting very excited. He's not a political guy. And then one day he just writes this, 9,000 word email and sends it to every senior executive in HHS. But honest to God, as in politics as that was, and it really got a lot of people mad. Yeah. Got me mad because I had to, it happened right before I got cancer and everything was lit on fire. Paul probably, by doing that, lighting a match in a gas-filled room, he probably stopped this whole charade to try to keep the classrooms closed. I didn't approve of the tactic, but it worked. It's like, sure, a wildfire kills the possums, but it also kills everything around it. But people don't understand that their kids were probably in school in September 2020 because Paul Alexander just didn't think it was being done fast enough, and he went poof. Anyway, in my opinion, you talk about the mass vaccination, a larger conspiracy. I think talking to scientists like Paul about it is something that's probably something that's interesting. I can't talk to you on the science of all of this. I can talk to you about the politics of it.
And I think that there's this is what I'm asking about.
Yeah.
I think
I got there after fully finding out by an unprotected rectal examination by the Department of Justice that the department that the deep state existed. I knew that they did, and my wife, by saying no, don't go, my wife was saying you're going to encounter them again. And when I stopped and I got off the phone with the president, I had accepted the job. I said, look, it's not the DOJ, it's HHS. It's very different. It's not. It's much worse. The politics that have absolutely permeated to the cellular level of the Department of Justice has transformed our government science as well. And there are billions of dollars being spent on this stuff, including gain of function research. I think, when I left after I got cancer, the Antifa was harassing my family. We left New York after someone tried to burn our house down. And I had just gotten a negative cancer diagnosis, thank God. I'm 2 years, and I just got my second one last week, no cancer. But we left and moved to Florida because it was just not safe to be there. And because of the high level of vitriol that came out of the Russiagate stuff and came out of the COVID stuff, we had to go. I as well entered because I have, after nearly dying and not getting arrested when they're after you in Russiagate, you start asking questions about, morality, spirituality. And I had a lot of time to think of when I was dying. And then suddenly I wasn't. So I'm actually in a master's of theology now. I'm studying, right now, Augustine, St. Augustine. I spent a deep dive in the New Testament last year, and C.S. Lewis was the first class that I really took. And C.S. Lewis has this great book.
Now you got me listening.
Yeah, he has this great book. I wish I could. He has a trilogy of science fiction. The final
wardrobe. Then you got the Mere Christianity.
Right. I read 14 books in 14 weeks, my friend, and I hadn't read 14 books in 14 years.
You can't put them down. You can't.
Yeah, but I mean, I also couldn't read because after all the radiation, I had to reread paragraphs 3 times. But I found that if I read them and had them read to me by a audiobook, I could do it. So I'm plowing through this stuff. And he has this great book called That Hideous Strength. Let me see. Hold on. See if I can find it.
I see you got Jerry Garcia back there, and you're a rock star too.
Yeah, I got Jerry over there and Ronald Reagan over here.
Oh, nice.
Anyway, in That Hideous Strength, C.S. Lewis writes about this cabal of scientists in UK in a town called Belbury that had somehow managed to get a blank check from the UK government to do scientific research, which they secretly and without telling the UK government, they were doing in alliance with aliens who were going to take over the Earth. They were basically going to usher these aliens into Earth, and this cabal of UK scientists were taking government money to do it. They were keeping it double secret, and they took over this part of town called the suburbs of London called Belbury. And it's a great book about how the narrator discovered the conspiracy and found all these scientists were lying. They were speaking in clever ways in order to hide the truth. And I'm reading this after going through the COVID task force and saying, oh my God, I know that guy. And because really Belbury is HHS. At the end, of the book, it all falls apart as it always does in a C.S. Lewis novel. And he, what happens is they have this, everything's falling apart because the narrator had been pulling it apart. But all the scientists come in for the kickoff banquet in Belbury to really initiate the end of the world. And somehow or another, the narrator has screwed it up and it's all falling apart. And what happens is the scientists all fall into multiple languages, like, the biblical city, right? Of Babel, and none of them understand each other. They're all speaking different languages. None of them are making sense. They're all making excuses in different languages. And Chris, that's exactly where we are. We're in Belbury right now, and all these scientists who had signed on to basically, in my opinion, destroy Donald Trump. I think the virus came because it came. I think if we knew the origin, like we should have known a year ago, we would find that the reason why it happened. But in fact, when people saw this coming, they noticed it as an opportunity to end Donald Trump, to stop the America First agenda, to do whatever they can. I'm telling you this. There are people inside HHS, whether it's whatever agency, they all have alphabetical significance of sort, right? That intentionally slowed down the response because they didn't want anything positive to happen before the election. They slowed it down, and of course, because you're slowing down response, more people are getting sick. And when more people get sick in the first wave of the pandemic, more people are going to die. So really, if you just do natural logic, more people died because members of the federal bureaucracy decided they needed to put the brakes on the response so that people would go to the polls during election day really concerned and voting for change because it wasn't working out. I'll give you a perfect example. President Trump put together at my urging the largest public service announcement campaign in history, $350 million, for a PSA campaign that, in our opinion, was to just end the despair and get people ready to somehow or another defeat the disease, right? $350 million. It wasn't going to be straight to the camera, sponsored by Pfizer crap. We had better ideas. We were going to use very interesting people, not political folks. And we were bringing in Academy Award nominated, non-crazy woke people to get involved in it. And we tried to get the money provisioned. We could provision money for a vaccine within hours. I could not provision money for a major ad campaign that would have turned things around a bit in our society and gotten people, in August telling people your kids are going to go to school. Don't be concerned, right?
Oh, this was an ad campaign of not fear and wear a mask and stay home, stay safe. This was an ad campaign of, everything's going to be okay.
Right. It was. I mean, there was going to be a component of the other stuff, right? But in reality, it was to let people understand that this is not the end of the world and life will go on when we get past it. But we never got to the scripting because we never got the money, right? It got held up in the bureaucracy by bureaucrats for 3 months in the middle of a pandemic. 3 months the money was bottled up, and it wasn't disbursed to pay for the ad campaign until after the election.
Okay, an ad campaign. We had Trump behind the podium, though. The president of the United States. I can't imagine how many people were tuned into those every single day. And didn't Trump make a mistake by not soothing people and instead going along with Dr. Fauci and this message of fear? And do you think that he was possibly listening to the media and polls a little too much? And I
don't agree with that. I understand why you say that because we all have perfect vision in hindsight.
Well, I knew at the time it was wrong. It's not looking back. At the time, there were a lot of people.
I can talk to you. I'm willing to address this. I'm willing to address this. All right. I was there, and I'm willing to address it. I'm telling you that every governor, listen, I think that I am a very loyal Trump person because I've known him since 1988. I will always be a loyal Trump person. I will support him in every circumstance. But you also know that I moved to Florida because of Governor DeSantis, because I knew that he wouldn't let Antifa bother my children. And I knew that, of course, all the other benefits of living in Florida. But really, we were drawn here by DeSantis and also by the need to leave New York. So I come at this situation loving my president and really appreciating my governor. And I'm still, at this point, until Ron DeSantis gets in this race, I don't feel compelled to take up the media challenge that they're eventually going to be at some kind of blood sport competition. If he gets in the race, I have to pick a side, but right now I love my president and my governor, right? I know people say you got to get off the fence. I understand that. I'm not in this game now, right? Because it nearly killed me. But I'm never going to leave Donald Trump's side. Having said that, all right, everything involved in the COVID response, the meetings I was in, every word, every syllable that came out of someone's mouth was so valulated and so devoted to. You could say a word about a million lies in a syllable, and the message that was coming in all the different sides of the meeting involved the existential threat, at least at the time we thought, not just to the nation but to the world. And also there was a very deep and abiding sentiment underneath everything we were talking about that was wondering why this was happening, and there was a real suspicion that it was some kind of an attack. So all of this was going on, and Donald Trump was managing it as a businessman would. We started Operation Warp Speed to take treatments, vaccines, and tests off the table from the bureaucracy. The problem we had is, I believe, I can tell you that from my perspective, I can't imagine what the president was going through, but I'd never seen anything like it in my entire born days. And I've, been in the battlefield. I've been in terrible, dire circumstances. I've been shot, kidnapped and stabbed. I mean, I've been all over the world. I've just never seen anything like it in my life. I think when you're drinking from a fire hose, hold on, when you're drinking from a fire hose, you're going to get a little on your shirt, So I sat through a lot, backbenched, by the way, a lot of telephone calls the president was having with governors. I sat through one with Ron DeSantis. From the backbench. I mean, all the governors were handling it differently because we're Republican. They have the right to do so. Some of them handled it horribly. New York comes to mind, and some of them handled it very well. Florida comes to mind. But everyone had the right to do what they had, what they needed to do, and they had their own set of advisors. Ron DeSantis decided he didn't like the advisor he had at the Surgeon General and wisely replaced him with Ladapo, but he didn't do that until the crisis had mostly passed. From my perspective, I've never seen anything as overwrought. I believe that Donald Trump was being lied to on a regular basis. I believe because of, I just outlined for you, the fact that they tied up spending on the largest public service announcement campaign in history because it was going to start to heal the wounds of America before an election that they needed to win. I mean, I believe that Donald Trump was led astray from the moment he raised his hand and had the other on the Bible by a group of Republicans who had made a plan in order to beat the Trump agenda through personnel choices, because politics is personnel. Donald Trump was being buffeted by deep state, deep science sources from the moment he walked into that building. And I think it's never been done before. That level of pressure and that level of attack, the lawfare alone, we saw it this week, it's never been tried on any human being, and he's still standing. I want to tell you this. I know you're for DeSantis, and I admire that. Some friends of mine who I think are terrific work for DeSantis. I'm a Trump guy, and I think Trump's going to win. But I'll tell you, this COVID response, I think campaigning on it is a mistake. I think it's a mistake for several reasons, but I don't think it's going to be a huge success for Ron DeSantis, and I don't think answering questions on the COVID response is going to treat Trump lightly either. It was a messy, terrible situation that nobody handled in a stellar fashion. I think the people who are insulting Ron DeSantis's handling of it aren't, in my mind. I know what he did. I was there. I think they're stretching the truth, and I also think that blaming Donald Trump for doing his level best under attack from deep science and deep state at the same time for mistakes he may have made, I think that's also a cheap shot.
Now, you talk about DeSantis and Trump, and I actually was quite a critic of the governor. I actually crashed some of his events. Chased him around a couple times, protested in front of his mansion. I know everything that happened. I know what reopened South Florida. I mean, reopened Chris. But there was with DeSantis a pivot point. Actually, for as serious and down to business as the guy is, there was actually a press conference where the guy had tears in his eyes over what was going on with the hospitals and people dying without their loved ones. And he apologized for two of my friends that were arrested 3 times here in Broward County for keeping their gym open and not requiring masks. And then in 2021, which things were still going on in 2021, it was very, very
they're still going on now, bro.
Yeah, but with Trump versus DeSantis right now, a lot of people just want to know, because Trump wants to be back in office. DeSantis hasn't announced yet, but Donald
Trump may not, but I think he will. But he may not.
Donald Trump has announced. Yeah. Okay. And he does want to go back. And we just heard Fauci say that there is going to be another pandemic coming.
Oh, I think there will.
I think
I'm actually preparing for it.
I think
there will. I think, Chris, if you think that the gain of function research on the coronavirus it is not the end. I can tell you from my perch as assistant secretary, we're in for this on an ongoing basis. I think America has to learn to live in an airborne virus environment.
Having said that, a lot of people, they're concerned if we put Donald Trump back in office, has he learned any lessons? Would he do anything differently? Because at this time, he's still standing behind the vaccines. He's refusing to acknowledge the death and carnage that has come from them. He is. I don't even know if he said anything bad about Dr. Fauci. We just simply don't know. And if anytime I put out that question anywhere on Twitter, you see anywhere like, would he do anything different? A lot of people immediately go, well, Ron DeSanctimonious. Well, I know that DeSantis did some things that we didn't, we wish he acted a little bit quicker to reopen some of and rein in these governors, these local mayors. He did that eventually. However, has Donald Trump learned? And if I get in front of the guy, I will ask him this. I want to know. A lot of people want to know, would he do anything differently?
Yeah, let me tell you, this is a legit question. I've known him for a little while, and I don't think he's really changed over the years all that much when it comes to these kinds of things. I'll tell you this. Donald Trump has unfinished business. This is one of the reasons why I really admire him. He has unfinished business. He will not let go of the monster that threw him out of Washington, the monster that is arresting people and leaving them rot in jail for what would have been misdemeanors. He's not going to let the weaponized Department of Justice take out the United States. I can tell you that Donald Trump is sure he's thinking about what's happening to him. This is a BS arrest. It's me, right? He's thinking about that. But I can tell you from my own personal experience that Donald Trump is really more worried about what condition the United States in, and he truly feels that he is the one that can fix it. Now, I understand that it wasn't fixed, but you understand we haven't even seen the full force of the cabal that came down on him. We haven't yet seen it. And by the way, just so you know, if DeSantis is president, it's going to come down on him just as strong, and you'll have these same tests. So we need to know where DeSantis stands on being able. I think he would, right? But I want to tell you this: Donald Trump understands that he was deceived by dishonest actors inside the Beltway. People like Reince Priebus and others who brought the first wave of people in whose own sworn agenda was to stop Donald Trump. We saw them. How the hell did Fiona Hill get into the NSC from the Brookings Institution? How did that happen? That whoever brought Brookings people into the White House should be drummed out of the Capitol Hill Club forever. I can't imagine that you would do that. The really bad hires, and Donald Trump really didn't get a handle on it because he was getting deceived from all sides. I mean, you understand that the deep state is the biggest monster. It's the Demogorgon. You can't stop this thing with even one player, right? But at the same time, from my perspective, he got a handle on it with Johnny McEntee. I don't know if you know this young man. He's an incredible young man who has a great mind, and Donald Trump put him in charge of the White House Office of Personnel in the last year plus. And Johnny, everybody that he brought in was good at their job and was loyal to Trump and to the Trump agenda. But the problem is they were all burrowed in, right? Donald Trump knows now more than anyone else, because of the personal lessons that he was taught, that there is no one he can trust inside the Beltway. How is he going to deal with staffing the next administration? I can't tell you because I'm not in those discussions with him, but I can promise you this: it will be completely and absolutely different.
He endorsed Kevin McCarthy.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
He endorsed Kevin McCarthy, though.
I get it. Right now, I'm fine with McCarthy. So far, I'm fine with McCarthy. I went to the House Republican retreat in Orlando 2 weeks ago to talk to members about the weaponization subcommittee of judiciary. They're very serious about this. I have high hopes. And let me tell you something. I had no high hopes for Durham. I went through the Russia investigations in the House, and in the Senate, you couldn't tell in the Senate who was a Democrat and who was Republican. That's why I told them all to go to hell, right? In the end, I think that Donald Trump has a discernment after having all of these problems. And I think also it's very possible that the deep state has found the ends of their limits. There were only two things, Chris, that the deep state hadn't done. Only two things left in their quiver of arrows to stop Donald Trump, and one of them was arrest him. And now they've done that, so they only have one thing left. Somehow or another, he's still standing. I think Donald Trump has unfinished business. I think the best person to hire to complete unfinished business is the guy that didn't finish it in the first place. I trust him. He's good and has always been good to my family. The things that he's talked to me about after the Russia investigations, the conversation I had with him after I got my cancer diagnosis, and he told me he was going to put me on medical leave so that I could go through my radiation and chemo. That conversation will always remain in my mind, that this man has real commitment to the people around him who nearly give their lives for him. And he understands that goes all the way down to the street level and people all across this nation. I'm not the only one. Roger Stone's not the only one. Paul Manafort's not the only one. I mean, J.D. Gordon, Carter Page, Waleed Farris. I could go on and on and on. We call ourselves the remnants. You understand what that means? I'm in theology now. I get my wife tells me I talk about this stuff way too much.
Don't get too away as you do those theology courses. Don't get too away from the Bible and too into the theological.
Well, I get it, but it's a philosophy.
Yes, I know the remnant. Yes, I know the remnant.
But yeah, believe me, where I'm going to school, it's very based upon Scripture, and they're very traditional Catholic. It's kind of. There's a Latin Mass, So, if you watch FBI reports coming out of Raleigh, North Carolina, you know that we are now considered to be fascist. But, I think really, in the end, the remnants of the investigations, the people whose lives are ruined and will never, ever be the same. There is a family who had to take their children out of college because they lost everything. There's a man who didn't work for 6 years and just recently got work. There's a family where their daughter tried to commit suicide twice. The ancillary problems that came out of this are also there for the January 6th people. Now they're going to be there for everybody surrounding this whole entire Stormy Daniels situation. The weaponization of government is real, and Donald Trump has unfinished business. I don't think there's a better person to hire to clean out a sewer than a guy who found his way out of it.
Michael Caputo, I thank you so much for joining me. And by talking to you, I could not tell that you were this close to death and recover from cancer. You're sharp and you got a lot of energy. And wow, what an interview. I cannot wait to get this thing up.
Oh, thanks, Chris. I'm humbled by it. I'm glad to be here. I nearly wasn't. And, I tried. I got to tell you, when I got a lot of terrible press after I left the administration, or after I left because of my cancer. And there were a lot of people that wished me dead. And one of the people who was wishing me dead then got cancer and survived. You kind of think about other things when you realize that you're going to leave your daughters with a terrible, after the Russia investigations, we had nothing. I get a second chance at it. I'm not going to waste my time bickering between people who are with Trump and people who went to DeSantis. In the end, the Republican primaries must end in unity. If Donald Trump wants to run, he'll run. And he is. And if Ron DeSantis wants to run, God bless him. He has every right. It's a Republican primary. Let's talk about issues. I'm here for it.
Thank you for joining me, Michael.